96, the Newcomer. Halfway through her second of 3 closet rooms, she found the correct clothing, the jade sari that had been a birthday present from Joyce, one of the most respected council members. Choosing it was a perfect strategic blend. Wearing it would enlist one of her enemies, and her look would be respectfully frumpy. She hated that sari. Inside of her room of mirrors, she released a drawer from the left mirrored wall and took out her silver comb. She liked to comb the tangles out of her hair before calling her hair matrix. Combing her own hair calmed her, and she didn't like the way her hair matrix deliberately ripped through the knots, to emphasize a shorter style would be healthier for her hair. When she was through, she buzzed Stephanie, then sat on her vanity to wait for the stylist. From the reflection in her mirror, she saw the crumpled shawl hanging off her bed. She decided to stash it with her other daughter's gifts that she could part with but would never use. She went over to pick it up, and as she did so, a slip of paper fell from out of the torn lining. A tan piece of Commons parchment drifted lazily to the floor. Cheryl shook her head at the sight of Terry's morning arousal, wondering how he could be so hard after his pre-dawn activities. She watched intently as he struggled to urinate and was surprised that he called for breakfast instead of relieving his pressure. By the time that Mandy arrived, he was flaccid. When she entered the room, he lost his control, but folded his arms across his lap as Mandy bent over to place his breakfast tray on the floor. Without looking at him, she backed out of the room. Hearing a comment from the monitor matrix, she went over to the screen. They watched him stand, his direction making a tent in his loincloth. He adjusted himself and then sat down to devour his breakfast. "What time will the fetching matrix arrive?" Mandy asked. "The charge is scheduled for 12 o'clock appointment." "I don't think he'll hold out that long, do you?" "Time will tell," Mandy said, looking down, then back to the matrix. "You'll be off by then." "Yep, 1 more hour," Cheryl said, glancing at her digital. Then back to the screen. Terry had stopped eating and was sitting back, lost in thought. He stretched his arms and clasped them behind his head. Cheryl was taken with the chiseled features of his face and the slight hair growth at his cheeks and chin. What really sent her mind reeling was watching his pictorials rise and fall as Terry thought about Lenise. "It's amazing how quickly the charge is ripened, isn't it?" Shelley asked, mostly to herself. Mandy saw that Terry had returned to his breakfast. "It's hard for me to look at him at all. I've been his breakfast matrix all of his life and can remember him as a child. You've only monitored him for a few weeks. I've been watching him grow for 13 years. Cheryl looked at Mandy. "You'd better watch it. You're sounding sentimental." Mandy registered Cheryl's reaction and adjusted accordingly. "That's against the way," she said, making a mental note not to confiding Cheryl about anything she didn't want made public knowledge. "There's supreme logic in the way," Cheryl continued. "Now more than ever you need to remind yourself that the mail is only a charge." She returned her focus to the screen. "More than one matrix has been attacked by an overripe charge. And he," she said, tapping on the screen, "is as overripe as they come." She chuckled at her own pun. Mandy was becoming ill with Cheryl's jesting. She couldn't think of her child in a sexual way and was finding it impossible to listen to someone who did. Terry clapped his hands and Mandy excused herself with her duty. Jennifer had arrived early, and the 2 monitor matrices were comparing notes and giggling about the charge when Mandy came back from her temp room. Mandy said her goodbyes and left for the kitchen, blocking out the monitor's laughter with a slapping of her bare feet against the empty hall's tiled floor. Some date. Sometimes, not often, I allow myself to think about Rachel and our baby. Sometimes, not often, I allow myself to stroke the silky hair that I smell in my dreams. Sometimes, not often, I allow myself to gaze into the green eyes that read my soul. Sometimes, not often, I can see her nursing our baby while her porcelain face blazes a portrait into my memory. Sometimes, most often, I sweep the memories away because sometimes, most often, the pain is too shattering for company. And sometimes, most often, I don't allow myself to remember. Therese stirred honey into her steaming cup of chamomile and brought it to her desk. She set it down next to her computer so that the tea could cool, and then recalled her first exam for grading. It was Maureen's test. The thought of this promising student brought back memories of a classmate in her own restructured class and the teacher who taught it. She could see Matrix Bertha introducing herself to the students. Good morning, sisters. I am Matrix Bertha, and I will guide you through the learning of the restructure. Immediately after introduction, a girl's hand went up. The teacher acknowledged the student. My name is Candace from Nisian Castle. I have come to inform you that my mother, Matrix, has arranged my transfer out of your class. The girl rose and brought the transfer code to Bertha, then went back to her seat to collect her things. Bertha turned to the class, placed a card next to her computer, then returned her attention to the class. All hands were up. One by one she acknowledged each student, heard her request, and placed her card on the desk. Believing that she'd heard from every girl, she sat down, recalled her roster, and entered the codes beside each girl's name. One name remained on the roster. She wasn't ready for this. The High Council had been prepared for unanimous departure of the class and prepped Bertha with a speech to explain her crimes against the way. A copy of her speech was already programmed into the class's pin boards to be viewed and encoded by the students' guardians for final rejection or acceptance. She wondered what she would do about the name that remained. Should she ask the girl for a transfer code, or should she wait for her to offer it? She wondered if the class had noticed that one of her sisters hadn't turned in a request. Bertha rose from her desk, deciding to go ahead with the speech. She cleared her head to begin. The class ignored her. Some of the girls were talking amongst themselves. Some were writing or drawing, and some were pulling away from her desk, preparing to leave. Bertha told the departing sisters to sit down and tried to speak over the noise. She was interrupted by the hand of the student who hadn't turned in her code. Resigned to the insubordination of her first departing class, she acknowledged the student.